Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this afternoon's webinar. My name is Kieran Saunders, and I'll be hosting this webinar. The webinar is around planning and your first steps towards creating your first successful custom app. I've got with me James Ducker from Decent Group, and I'll be introducing him, or he will be introducing himself in just a second. I've just got a few sort of health checks and just around the webinar before we begin. So we're using GoToMeeting. Hopefully you've logged in okay, and hopefully you can hear us. If not, you're just seeing the screen, and you can go to help.citrix.com if you're getting issues with audio. Then hopefully you can see this slide, and you can go and get some help there. So like I said, I'll be hovering in the background, helping James and answering your questions while James gives you the benefit of all his knowledge over the years in planning. So if you can see on the slide there on the right-hand side, if you can use the control panel to ask questions, I'll be trying to answer them as we go. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll be going to a live Q&A. If you've got a microphone, if you're able in a quietish location, we'll bring you on live, and you can ask James a question directly to him and get him to answer it. If not, you can type your questions, and we'll try and get that answered at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'd love to hand over to James Ducker, and take it away, James.
Thank you very much indeed, Kieran, and good afternoon to you all. I am James Ducker, as it says, and you can hopefully see on your screen there. I am the director of a company in Swindon in the United Kingdom called Decent Group. Decent Group is a FileMaker developer. We're a platinum certified FileMaker house, and I've been personally using FileMaker since 1994, and I'm certified in versions 10 to 15. I'm very pleased to say we also won, as a business, we won Partner of the Year from FileMaker in 2013. So we are business systems experts. Most of our systems are for commercial clients, although some for voluntary organisations and other entities as well. We specialise particularly in manufacturing systems, but also for many other industries as well: insurance, leisure, tourism, travel, retail, anything and everything, as most FileMaker developers do. My particular focus is on business systems implementation, which is why this subject of planning is one that I'm particularly interested to speak about. And look forward to doing so. We just, because this is a FileMaker presentation, it's only fair for me to explain some of the reasons why I like FileMaker. As a company, we are completely commercially independent of FileMaker, so it's kind of Kieran to invite us along to do this, but we always choose to use it for the job at hand, and that is because we find FileMaker, the platform, is second to none for speed of development. You can get a lot more done in less time with FileMaker, which doesn't mean you should go at it with a hammer and tongs without planning it, as we will soon discover. It is extremely versatile, and we've not, I think, found anything that FileMaker can't do. It is basically, FileMaker's ability is basically limited by the aptitude of the developer who's using it. We also love FileMaker because it is very, very good at integrating with other systems, which makes it a really big player in the market. So we make it talk to all sorts of manufacturing systems, to machines that cook jam, and of course to Sage, QuickBooks, Xero, and all the other things that you may wish to join it too. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about FileMaker, the platform. What I hope is going to happen now is we're going to try to find out a little bit about you, and I think Kieran has just, I hope, successfully launched a poll of who you are on your screen. So if you can have a look at that now and tell us where you are. I think this is the only question that we've got. So this won't go on this won't go on too long, and this is very exciting. It's like election night. We can see the results flooding in. 69% of you have voted. 80% of you have voted. Somebody's changed their mind. It's gone down to 79. Here we are. 85. 15% of you are not interested. 85, 86, 85, 86. That's good. Very good. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for that. Kieran's just hidden the results from me, so I can't actually see who's answered. But what we will do is share those results with you, and so you can see on the screen. It's quite helpful to know who we've got here. So 31% of you are just starting to think about using FileMaker, 23% in process of developing, 32 existing users, and a handful of you using non-FileMaker systems and looking at alternatives. Now, if I had known that before, if we'd done these slides the other way around, I wouldn't have had to evangelize about how wonderful FileMaker is, because clearly you all know that already. So that is a little bit about who is here with us. So what we will do now is try to go on to the presentation itself. So this, you may have got wind from FileMaker's marketing activities that there are 3 guides that have recently been published over the last few months to what they call the FileMaker Custom App Success Framework. And those 3 guides are Plan, Create, and Deploy. I would strongly recommend having a read of those 3 guides, and this webinar, of course, is to support the first of those, which is the Plan guide. I think also somewhere in your screen you might find there's a handout PDF, which is the Plan guide. So those 3 guides, here they are available to you. They're available free. They're actually very, very good. FileMaker has written these earlier this year, I believe. So today we'll be talking about planning, and then coming up over the next couple of months, I think by September, there will be further webinars for Create and Deploy. If you get to the end of this one and you decide you don't particularly like me very much, don't worry, because the other 2 will be run by somebody else. Okay, well, let's start off with a little bit of thought about what a custom app actually is. We're all familiar with using software in the course of our daily lives, and of course FileMaker is very unusual, well, unique in the marketplace really, because it is a really mature software platform on which you can build custom apps for business, or indeed for anything else. Which, as you see from this lovely montage here, FileMaker has multiple constituent parts, and as such the apps in question can be used on desktop in the traditional fashion, but of course we have FileMaker Go with a big push towards mobile working, and indeed we now have WebDirect as well to extend the reach of the software to those without FileMaker installed. And we are looking at, what I would like us to look at is the process by which I think we should go about planning and creating the software that is there. It is very, very easy with FileMaker, and I see this all the time. People will pick up FileMaker and immediately start building something. And 5 or 6 times out of 10, that thing that they build is completely fit for purpose and very good. I'm a little bit more boring than that, and I like to have a think about what I'm doing first, and I'm going to go through some of the reasons why I think that is important, and also some of the methods by which I like to do it. This, by the way, is all how I think it should be done. There's no shortage of other people who've got other methodologies. You've possibly come across some of those before. But this is my take on it, so it's not necessarily going to be right. It's just how I happen to do it, and it works well for me. So we've got 6 stages of software development, which you can see down the side. We need to identify the problems we've got and the nature of the challenges we face. and then delve a bit deeper into the analysis. What is the problem? Is it really a problem? What are we going to do about it? Design the solution that we're going to build, then build and test it, then deploy and implement it, and then evaluate it and see how we get on. Now, we're not going to go into too much detail on numbers 4 and 5 because, of course, creating and deploying are going to be covered in future sessions. But I need to go through those a little bit. I'll give you some pearls of questionable wisdom to take away on those, and then, of course, we need to look briefly at evaluating what we did and how that closes the loop back to improving what we've got and getting the most out of the time and investment we've put into it. Now, let us therefore begin with number 1, which is to identify the problem we have. Now, we need to look here at what the problem is, what the need is, and what on earth we're doing at the moment. So, first of all, this sounds obvious, and possibly it is, but we must establish what the business goals are, what the goals are of the teams of people who will be using the software that you create, and what the individual users' goals are. Now, I do this for a living, and I have to justify everything I recommend. So clearly, I can't ask questions like, what can I do? What looks shiny? Can I make some shiny maps and do some charts and things, because it's very fancy and pretty to look at. We have to look at what the business actually needs, or what the problem is. Think about what you've started this process for. Is it about getting more information out of an existing process? Is it about saving duplication of effort, saving money, making more money, getting better reporting out of what you're doing? Think about what the need is and what you're trying to do, and that need will have a cost of pain or missed opportunity or whatever, and that cost is the cost that I, as a person who has to do this for a living, I have to be mindful of that cost and try to justify proposing a solution to it. Sometimes, by the way, the answer is just do nothing and live with it. It depends on what the nature of the problem is. So, in order to identify, we need to do a few things. We need to discover what on earth is going on in the business or organization now, and this can be quite a lengthy process. So we've got here 4 ways of doing that. Watching and learning is very good and very interesting, going to see what people are actually doing in their day-to-day work. The old time and motion man comes to mind. Sitting there looking at what you're doing and sort of counting your toilet breaks or whatever. We have conversations and interviews and workshop style sessions, which need a bit of management and can be can take up an awful lot of time without delivering very much if they're not well managed, and questionnaires. Now, depending on the size of the organization you're dealing with, this may be very easy to do, or it may be very complicated to do. If you've got more than about 10 people in a business, and I know this through bitter experience because Decent Group has just gone up to 11, there will be some sort of inefficiency baked into what you're doing, just because human beings can only manage so many things at once and can only interact with so many people and so many processes together. So what I recommend here is to draw some of these. These are process maps. You may well have seen similar things before, and here's a little example that we made for a small business in the manufacturing sector. This is one of about 20 process flows that we put together for them. So we have a few features of this, but we'll just go through it. This one is about returning goods where the customer believes them to be incorrect. And if we look at the top left of it, we can see the process starts with the little green dot. or the big green dot, saying the wrong goods have arrived. So the customer believes the wrong goods have arrived. They will communicate that to the customer services team, who will do their best to establish whether this is a genuine problem, or is the customer mistaken, or is it actually something else. And we can see we've got this orange diamond, which represents what we call a decision point, that says, either yes or no, this is or isn't a genuine problem. And if it isn't, then you go round to the right and follow a different process, which is about the customer having changed their mind rather than actually being in receipt of the wrong thing. If it is a genuine problem, we go down. It's always nice to apologize to a customer if you've got something wrong, and then the question is, we'll establish whether the customer wants a replacement. If they don't, we go over to the right. Is the customer happy to keep the incorrect item? If that's the case, then you might just credit them the difference, or even invoice them for the difference. And they will make do with the item that you inadvertently sent them, and they should go away. The customer should then go away happy, which is what we see at the top of the screen. We may need to send a replacement set of goods before receiving the incorrect ones back. In which case we use another pink box. The pink boxes mean, I should have put a key on this really, but the pink boxes mean go and follow another process. It's not just because I like pink. Either way, whether the replacement is required or not, it's then incumbent upon the customer at the top there to prepare the goods for collection. Then we have a haulier bringing them back, and then the warehouse at the bottom there follows another process, which is to put those goods away. Finally, the customer services operation will raise a credit note for the value of whatever was sent incorrectly. So this is an example of a fairly simple process flow that actually encapsulates a few different activities and a few different ways things can go. So we have this idea of we might on some occasions want a replacement, and on some occasions we don't, for example. So we can see by drawing this out, we can begin to work out what on earth is going on. Now, I'll just obviously we can see what that process means, and as I say, for a small business in this particular case, this is process number 13 out of 20 odd. I think it's really important to draw these and draw them in about this level of detail. We don't need to go into every single step and every single activity that is done. We can get a high-level understanding of what is going on here. Just looking at the anatomy of this process flow, I expect everyone will have seen process flows before. What you may or may not have seen is them divided into these horizontal sections. We call these swim lanes. So there is a swim lane for the customer. If you imagine the whole thing as a swimming pool and you've got ropes going across, we've got a swim lane for the customer, a swim lane for customer service, a swim lane for the haulier, and a swim lane for the warehouse. We'll come back to those swim lanes in just a minute. People often ask me, by the way, what software I used to draw that diagram. It happens to be something called AccuProcess Modeler. The answer to that question isn't particularly important though, because I strongly suggest the best thing you can use for it is a whiteboard. Because with a whiteboard you can scribble, you can rub things out, much better than a flip chart, by the way, you can't rub things out on a flip chart. Use a whiteboard, draw your swim lanes across, and you can be quite creative with it. Then there are various programs, including AccuProcess Modeler, but also Microsoft Visio and OmniGraffle and all sorts of other things that will allow you to draw them more nicely. The important thing though is not to have a nice diagram, the important thing is to have a correct understanding of what on earth is going on. Okay, so we've got these swim lanes here, and I'll just draw your attention to one other thing that is part of this diagram, which is, notice that, for example, from the very first point, wrong goods have arrived, says the customer, the arrow then goes to the customer services swim lane in which they look up the order. Notice that the arrow has crossed a line between two swim lanes, and the same happens later on. The customer prepares the goods for collection, the haulier transports them, and then the warehouse puts them away. On all of these occasions, and some others too, the arrow crosses from one swim lane to another. And I would invite you, just when you draw this is one of the reasons why swim lanes are important. When you see an arrow crossing a swim lane, you've got two parties talking to each other. And when two parties talk to each other, that's when things tend to go wrong, and that's where you may need some help with the systems to plan that interaction and make sure that everybody understands what those things are. So we begin to look at what the interactions are between the people, the departments, between the customer and the supplier, whoever it is, because that is the key area where you're most likely to need some help. Generally speaking, people are quite happy doing their own job and get into a routine of doing it, but it's when you have interactions with other people, that's when things start to get interesting. So just keep that in mind. The other thing you can do with these, by the way, is if you say you had 20 of them for a smallish business and you laid them all end to end, you can straight away see what everyone's job description is, because you just read across the swim lane. So you can see from looking at this, there are some activities that the customer services team does, and here are the interactions they have with other parties. So it's quite good actually as sort of building a bit of a Haynes manual to see what is going on. Okay, so we've had a little look and drawn some diagrams to establish what is going on and what our goals are, and we must keep those goals in mind as we move on to the next steps. So let's break that down a little bit and move on to the second part of our 6 steps to Nirvana, which is to analyze what we have in front of us. So think about what the interactions are between people or departments. We've just looked at the process flow and talked a little bit about where those arrows cross over in the swim lanes. So that's a particularly important and useful thing to look at. Keep in mind the goals we've set ourselves. Again, what do we want to achieve? Do we need a different outcome from the one we have? Are we trying to reduce errors? Are we trying to make the whole process faster? It's actually fine, but it's just faster. And then ask ourselves, what do we actually need to change? Is this process perfectly adequate as it is? It may well be. Are we trying to plug leaks? Are we trying to stop people wandering off from what that intended process should be? Because we've got a process, it's documented, that's what everyone should be doing, but in practice they're doing something else. So are we trying to identify what's where it's leaking, or do we actually want to change it and do other things? Now, depending on the nature of the problem, it may actually be helpful to draw a new process map. If we've mapped what we've got now, it's very often not valuable at all to model the chaos that we find ourselves in. We ought to really look at how things need to be and what the outcome is that we actually want and what that process looks like. So what a new process map may be vastly different from the old one. Indeed, you may have some processes that as a result of this project you choose to bin altogether. We really do need to think very carefully once we've decided what is going to change and what needs to change in order to support the goals we have. We need to think very carefully about how we implement that change in manageable stages. I come across no shortage of projects where the users or the developer has decided to take on far more in one go than is really sensible to do. It's very important to remember that whilst you're doing this systems implementation project, you still have a business to run, or you still have an organization to keep operating. You've still got customers to deal with, you've still got work to do, and this is very easily forgotten because people will set themselves a huge systems project and sometimes even get to the end of developing it and then be stuck on implementation because it is too big to change. Think of it as trying to change the fan belt of a car whilst the engine is running. It's not easy. We need to think about what this process change looks like and how we're actually going to get to that point. I strongly recommend dividing up whatever we decide to do into small digestible chunks. Sometimes this actually involves a bit of throwaway work. You might even put a temporary process in place that exists just to get you from where you are now to where you need to be, because the dependencies of the different parts of the project are such that you can't do it all in one go. I also like to think of it as having a bit of a pit stop between stages. You can spend as long as you like. You can spend as much time as you need to at a pit stop between two stages. So you've done some work, introduced it into the business, and you haven't finished the project, but the state of affairs is stable, and in fact you can leave it stable for some time and leave it there, and the business can quite happily run actually indefinitely if it needs to whilst you're in that pit stop. I very strongly recommend that for longer projects because of course you simply don't know what other circumstances will come up in the business or the organization in the meantime. Other things completely unrelated to the systems project can happen. The business gets a big order, somebody leaves, people go off sick. That sort of thing can come along and dent your project. If you have no choice but to press on to the bitter end, then you as the person designing the systems project hasn't helped the business with that. You need to do it in small stages which everyone can understand, which everyone can test, so you're never too far away from a pit stop where you can have a little rest whilst the business deals with that crisis or opportunity or whatever it is that's come along. And then once that time is over and you've got the focus of people back onto the systems project, you can pick it up from a safe and stable starting point to do the next bit. So that is a little bit of advice on or my own opinion. As I say, it's not really advice, but it's my opinion on some of the things to think about. But in terms of actually thinking about what we're going to do, as I said before, ask not what can I do, ask instead what needs doing. So focus on the users and their goals, not on shiny things that you've seen FileMaker can do when Kieran's shown you them on a webinar. Always meet with the users. We've talked about this before, but you've looked at what people are doing now, but don't forget to find out what they need you to do. And think about the manageable stages you've split the project into, and circulate that as a project plan and get people in a room and actually to sit there and sign up to it, because otherwise they'll only claim they weren't told and didn't get involved. So as we get into analysing what the actual problem is, think about using some of these prompts to write out what you've got. So today somebody cannot do something because something is missing, and this has an impact on our business in these terms. And you will be much better placed to do this if you've done your identify stage. People very often respond kind of emotionally to things and just think a particular process is always a pain to do, or there is a particular problem. But when you actually draw the diagrams, you will begin to see more accurately what that is. So what we've got at the bottom here is we've got a couple of examples. I'll read you the shorter one. Today our receptionists cannot sign in urgent care patients quickly because the paper forms take more than 15 minutes to print and fill in. This has an impact on our business because the doctors are sitting there idle whilst patients are filling out forms. That is the kind of problem statement that leads us from a process flow and a set of business goals to actually being able to design something. What we'll then do is I recommend something here, and that is, having written that simple statement, you find the nouns and verbs in that statement, and we've put them here in square brackets, and that will sort of help focus the mind about exactly what the problem is. So taking the lower one again, today our receptionists cannot sign in urgent care patients because the paper forms, you have to print them and you have to fill them out, and the doctors are sitting there idle while the patients are filling out the forms. So pull out those nouns and verbs and start to think a little bit about what that means, and then you begin to get into the nitty-gritty of the problem. Okay, so we've done a little bit of looking at what our goals are, what on earth is going on at the moment, and analysing the nature of the problem and thinking a little bit about implementation and how we're going to actually manage the delivery of whatever process change we need to put in. This then leads us on to the design stage, and what we have to do here is begin to think about, having got our list of nouns and verbs, who is going to use this thing, what do they need it to do, where and when will they use it, and a little bit of sort of technical thought, what type of device will it be used on. If we think back to the process flow about returning goods, that actually quite nicely supports some of the features of the FileMaker platform, or the constituent parts rather of the FileMaker platform. So you have your you might have your customer services team who be based in an office and will presumably be using FileMaker Pro on the desktop. You have your customers who may well be using FileMaker through WebDirect, because they probably won't have FileMaker installed on their own machine, although I would always suggest that they should, but they probably don't. So they will need to have access into your system through WebDirect on a browser. Your haulier, who's moving stuff around, will probably, well, by nature of their job, be a mobile worker, and of course you have to give consideration to the fact that they may well be using FileMaker out of range of an internet connection. So they would probably be wishing to use FileMaker Go, and you'd be looking to build some sort of sync system to retrieve records from the main system on the server and allow the driver to take them out and about on the road and capture signatures and whatever on the iPad or iPhone, and then bring them back and sync them back into the main system. So some of these things are quite basic questions, but just think about who will use this thing, where they will use it, and how they will use it. Think again, the last question, think about how the app you're building needs to interact with current systems. It's quite unusual to come upon an organization where you don't have any systems at all, and so you may well need to get sales order information from somewhere, or pass over invoice information into Sage or QuickBooks or some other accounting software after you've done it, or you might need to get shop floor data collection type information from manufacturing systems, or whatever you need to do, and think about how those interactions need to happen. Where is the primary data? Does FileMaker have the primary copy of the data, or does somebody else have it? Is it in the other system and FileMaker's just reading it, and so on. So those are some of the simple design considerations. Have a think about what your forms, your reports, your charts, your other bits are going to look at. What we need to do here really is arrive at a set of design principles and stick to them, because we must present a consistent appearance of the system for those who are using it. The more straightforward your system is to build or to use, the more likely it will support your process. What you tend to find is, particularly with FileMaker, we come across a lot of FileMaker systems where somebody has just thrown thousands and thousands of fields onto one screen, and they don't actually support the process that you're trying to take the user through. We are, of course, trying to make the user stick to this stick to the process flow we've created, and one of the aims of that is presumably to stop them wandering off it and going their own sweet way. You can help that by designing the system so it intuitively guides people through what they're supposed to do. If you think about when you book, for example, a hotel, you will follow a process on the website that doesn't allow you to get to the booking confirmation before you've paid, and you have to provide all the information about where you want to stay and how long for and so on, and then agree to a price. Somebody has drawn a process flow behind that, which is designed to make sure the user stays on that process and can't wander off it. That process flow is supported by good system design, where the screens and the navigation between parts of the system supports that process and basically enforces it. And there's no reason not to do that here. Okay. Here we've got a few examples of the sorts of things you might be writing out in the context of your design process. So looking at, you may sort of write a few bits of the spec, if you like, and depending on how big or complex your project is, you can write down and give the screens a number. So we might, they call this wireframing, don't they? Draw out some screens and see what they look like. Again, a whiteboard is very good for this kind of thing, much better than a piece of paper that you can't rub out on. Also, a whiteboard is a lot quicker than using any kind of design tools to cobble things together. And this can be a collaborative process. Maybe run it past some of your users. Kind of depends on the situation you find yourselves in. Sometimes users are not overly helpful at this point and start introducing or trying to introduce new features that actually, again, you can fall into the trap of introducing new things that don't actually support the goals you're trying to deliver. So just keep that in mind and keep focused on the task in hand. And remember, this is a cycle. We can go back and we can add things later. You don't have to get it all right the first time. So, having done some design work, I've taken you through that quite quickly, but I hope you get the idea. We're going to move on, of course, to actually building and testing the software that's there. As I say, that will be covered in a future webinar, but I'll give you a few little tips and thoughts about it. If you're going to be using FileMaker seriously, I strongly recommend going through the FileMaker training series, the first part of which is available free on the FileMaker website, I believe. Kieran is nodding sagely to confirm that I'm correct. FileMaker Basics is available, I understand, on the FileMaker website, and the advanced one is a paid-for product. But both are very good, and I strongly recommend you go through that, or whoever's building it should go through that. Kieran's also pointed at my screen to point out that it says FileMaker 14 on it. I believe the 15 one is now available, and you should therefore probably get a little bit more mileage out of using that. But I strongly recommend doing it. And of course, the Create guide, which is the second in this series of 3 guides. There will be a webinar about it, but the Create guide is already available from FileMaker's website and gives you a few clues on how to do it. Anyway, back to my opinions. We see now a giant picture of a bin on the screen, or for Americans amongst you, a trash can. The reason for that is that I strongly believe if you can, you should build what you've decided to do and then throw it away and start again. Because in all likelihood, the first version you do will not be as good as the second. Clearly this isn't always possible, but generally speaking, you will may well find yourself going down some routes during the process of building, which you think, well, actually, I could have built that better or more simply or whatever. Very tempting to fudge it or to build the new process for doing something in FileMaker and leave the old one lying around there, which just makes the system more complicated to support in the future for you or whoever else does it. So if you can, once you have built the system or build a prototype of the system, chuck it away and start again, because your notion of what is actually needed will be quite a lot clearer. I do understand that that's not always a practicable thing to do, but in the ideal world, it's a good thing to do. So you get clearer thought out of it after that. Okay, we will talk about a little bit about deploying and implementing the system. Again, there's a guide to that available on FileMaker's website, the deploy guide. It's about more than just sticking it on the server and sending people a link to using it. Think about if you're going to be importing data into the system you've created, what are your sources of this data? Are you importing good data into the system, or is it all a little bit ropey and we've got postcodes in the phone number field and all that sort of thing? Think carefully about what data you are getting. I often see projects that are held up by, at this stage, held up by data that is being waited for, and you get the whole project grinds to a halt for 3 months because somebody is cleaning up the spreadsheet and they don't really have time to do it. They don't really want to do it, but they've been told they must do it, and that sort of holds up and thwarts the whole thing. Have a think about this. In fact, have a think about it in advance before you start. You know, how are you going to get this data in? Do you really need it? There is often a case to be made for archiving an old system and, you know, putting it to bed in such a way that it can be called up and reports extracted from it and then starting afresh. It all depends on what the nature of the problem is. Sometimes you actually don't have the data that you need because it's all in people's heads. And I would recommend not asking those people to spend hours making a spreadsheet of it. You can actually design your system in such a way that the data can be gathered from the user whilst they use it. So if your system requires, for example, a list of products, and you haven't got that list of products in a clean form anywhere, then design some screens at the point of entering a sales order which guide the user through setting up the product as well. And then that way you are building clean data as you go without putting any great load on somebody who has a huge job to do, doesn't really understand why they're doing it and doesn't want to do it and probably won't do a very good job of it, and it will hold the project up as well. So that's a little bit about data. Think again about how you manage the process change. You're going to be introducing this system into a business or organization that still needs to operate while you're doing it. Don't plan to switch it all on a Monday morning and be super heroic. Do it in small chunks, which hopefully you will have planned and thought about in advance. It's very easy at the point of implementation, by the way, to get distracted or allow people to say, oh, this is lovely, but it would be even better if it did this, and suddenly you've got a load of bonus features creeping in which actually disrupt the process flow that you've agreed that you need to support, and possibly those bonus features take up a lot of your time as the developer and also don't necessarily support the goals that are there. Remember that you can, you know, we will be going through and evaluating how well this thing works. Some of those things that come out at this point, excuse me, will be very good ideas. Write them down on a separate sheet of paper or another whiteboard if you've still got whiteboard space left after all this, and come back to them later. Don't get yourself distracted with it. Okay, so that takes us more or less through the development process, as we will have implemented the system and done some done some work on introducing not just the system, but the changes to the business process into the business, and hopefully we'll have done that in a structured way that doesn't create too much stress for everybody. We then need to look at how that went and what happened. And all I will say on this is come back to the goals you set yourself at the beginning. Do those goals still exist? Have they been met? To what extent have they been met? It's quite unusual to have ticked off every goal right at the beginning, and I would strongly suggest think about this as a cycle. Go back, draw another process flow, and see where you then are. There is no shame in coming back and constantly improving what you've got. It's a very good thing to be doing. So go back and be honest. Give yourself an honest appraisal of what is actually happening in there, to see what is there. I'll give you one other observation which I meant to throw out a little bit earlier, actually, when we were talking about design, build and test. Can I suggest that you try to identify, when you're looking through these things, try to identify one or more users who's very hostile to the whole project. These people can be extremely useful to you. You'll always find one, and you need to give them the system to test, because if anyone's going to break it, it's going to be them. And if they can't break it, then you've probably done a pretty good job. So just some thoughts on testing. Okay, so that takes us through our little cycle, and I've found a few glib phrases that I thought I would put up on the screen for you to ponder as well. My favourite one of these, I mean, we've all heard you can have it cheaply, quickly, or done well, pick two. That's very true. But my favourite one of these is weeks of programming can save you hours of planning. So it's very easy to pick up FileMaker and start going at it hammer and tongs and enjoying all these development tools that FileMaker have provided without actually really thinking about what you're doing. And you end up spending a lot of time and money on that, and you may or may not meet your business goals, who knows.